Hello, everybody. Thank you for being with us. My name is Aristotle Papanikolaou. People refer to me as Telly, as you know. Together with my friend and colleague, George Dimokopoulos, we run the Orthodox Christian Studies Center here at Fordham. We welcome you, and we're looking forward to a very exciting evening. But we would like to begin with prayer. And I'd like to welcome to the podium John Cicero of the Society of Jesus, who's also our Vice President for Mission and Ministry. Thank you, John.
Good evening, everyone. Let's be mindful that we, as always, we're in God's loving embrace. Almighty and gracious God, you are the source of all good gifts, so richly endowing us with the wonders of creation to nurture and sustain us. In your only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, you have shown us the path to fullness of life and love. And when we lose our way, in your abounding mercy, you show us again and again the path to true purpose and fulfillment, restoring our peace in mind and body. On the night before he died, this same Jesus prayed that we, his disciples, may all be one, just as he is one with you. As we gather this evening to reflect on that sacred call to unity, send your spirit of wisdom to inspire our presenter and to help each of us to discern paths to that unity through the complexities that only divide and separate us. Bless all those gathered here this evening, all those whom we love and serve, and especially those who are alienated, marginalized, and suffering the effects of division and war. We ask all of this, as always, in and through your holy name. Amen.
Thank you, John. So we are in our 19th year of the Economos Orthodoxy in America lecture, and every single year we've had the great honor of having the president attend, except for one dental emergency. And this year is no different, and I'm very honored to welcome to the podium the 33rd president of Fordham University, Tanya Tetlow.
I'm happy to report the dental emergency was not mine, but I assume my predecessors. And I'm thrilled to be here. I'm getting to the next event late because it mattered to me so much to be here at the Greek Orthodox lecture in the Center for Orthodox Christianity in the world. At this moment in our history where secularism has grown in its power, we are reminded that we overlook religion at our peril, that it is one of the most powerful tools that human beings have used for good and sometimes for ill. And at this moment, when we have the power of religion for good, the clarion call of faith on issues like climate change, the ability to cut through our political rationalizations to get to what is core in our humanity, to remind us of what is right, to remind us of the power of peace and of justice. But this is also a power, when misused, that can fuel division and conflict. And we watch with grief and dismay at what is happening in the Middle East right now and in Russia's continuing war on Ukraine. Analysts and scholars ignore the influence of religion, the sheer power that it holds at their peril. And we remind the world through the work of the Orthodox Christian Center of the power that that holds and how much we need to pay attention to it as we look at the events happening around us. We are so honored to welcome Nadieszda Kizenko and the ways that she will educate us on the impact of the Ukraine crisis on intra-Orthodox relations, of what this war is doing to the church itself. And I am so proud to be part of Fordham's focus on Orthodox Christianity, on doing the work of research and promoting understanding and respect and empathy and Christian unity that has never mattered more than it does today. There is not a single other university in the world doing this work, and we are so proud to do it and to welcome this community and have it be part of our fundamental mission. So I want to thank Chris and Anastasia Economos for funding this lecture, for all of you who have supported the work of the center. I am grateful for it and promise you it will be a core part of what Fordham does and achieves for a long time to come. So thank you for coming tonight. Welcome, and I look forward to the lecture.
Thank you, President Tetlow. It really was a great honor for President to welcome us in that way, and because her time is very precious, we're very grateful for her presence. And now I'm happy to introduce my friend and colleague here, George Dimokopoulos, who will introduce our speaker.
Good evening, everybody. So I have some specific ways that I'm supposed to introduce my good friend Nadia, but I'm actually going to begin with an anecdote before I read the text. Don't worry, you'll like it. So a few years ago, I wrote a short piece for Public Orthodoxy, which is this online editorial forum that our center runs, and I called the piece "Scholars Not Priests." And in that essay, I basically was revealing to those who might not have noticed this that the leading voices in our church, believe it or not, are largely women. We don't see that, perhaps, but there is a generation of women, of which Nadia is a part, and Vera, daughters of priests, who went on to become extraordinary scholars. I married a daughter of a priest, so I have I have a fondness in my heart for daughters of priests, right? But these women are doing absolutely extraordinary things, right? Doors have been shut to them in many ways, and yet they have found other ways to really help our tradition thrive. Okay, so now what I'm supposed to read. Dr. Nadia Kizenko is professor of history and director of religious studies at the State University of New York at Albany, where she researches and teaches on Russian and East European history with a focus on religion and culture. Her books include A Prodigal Saint, Father John Kronstadt and the Russian People, Pennsylvania State University Press Studies of the Harriman Institute in the year 2000, and Good for the Souls, A History of Confession in the Russian Empire, Oxford University Press, 2021. So please join me in welcoming our Economos Orthodoxy in America speaker, Dr. Nadia Kizenko.
Thank you very much for that introduction, George. Thanks very much to everyone for coming. And I would like to ask a favor of everyone present. This year, in January, I broke one foot. Then, after it was recovered, I broke several bones in the other foot. And I see that I'm standing very close to a ledge right now. So if you see me veering over the edge, please speak so that the lecture can continue. Thank you. Okay. When I was invited to give the Economos in Orthodoxy in America lecture, I naturally first thought about history and some topic I have studied at length. The sacrament of repentance, maybe, or 19th century saints. But as I thought about it some more, it seemed wrong to speak tonight about some aspect of Orthodox history that is safe, that doesn't keep us up at night. It seemed wrong to speak about a topic that's neutral, that we can all hear about with a sigh of relief, like, there's not going to be any trouble. But we got trouble. We are in a situation where Orthodox Christians are not only facing the same dreadful news that everyone sees on the front pages, we are also facing them not unified, but deeply divided within our own church. And it is not only a matter of jurisdictional or national differences, or rather, it is precisely the struggle over jurisdictional boundaries and who can determine them that has revealed the problem. The structures of orthodoxy, the processes in orthodoxy, the way that we function or don't function, all of that seems to be short-circuiting. I know that people used to joke, no, I don't belong to an organized religion, I'm Orthodox. But honestly, that is not as funny as it used to be. I'm addressing you tonight not only as someone who studies orthodoxy and writes about it for a living, I am also, and above all, speaking to you as someone who goes to church, who loves the church, and who wants to see a way out of the situation that we're in. Let us try to find that way. There are three issues in orthodoxy that I'd like to address tonight, and the two that reflect issues within the Orthodox Church are autocephaly and the territorial principle of church organization in general, meaning that for any given place, only one Orthodox bishop is in charge, or only one bishop is in charge. Synodality, or the process of arriving at consensus in church councils. One could also call it conciliarity. The third deals more with how individual Orthodox churches relate to the rest of the world, including the relationship between church and state. And then, having talked about these things historically, I'd like to reflect on ways of dealing with them in an Orthodox way. Until recently, it was possible to describe Orthodoxy as unity in plurality. How did this work? Because after all, the Orthodox Church, singular, consisted of more than a dozen local Orthodox churches, plural, with a wide variety of local practices. It had no overarching structure, body, or person that held it all together. And yet, with all this variety, it was still possible to say that Orthodoxy functioned relatively well. Indeed, that it functioned as one church. So what held Orthodoxy together, even at times when official hierarchical communion was broken? Some of it was shared faith in form of prayer. Some of it was secular authorities who wanted to preserve the church for political reasons. Some of it was mutual need. Some of it, a lot of it, was simply that there were not many opportunities for Orthodox from different regions to meet and to tell each other what they were doing. And sometimes all of these things came together. As our baseline, let's look at a case that many of us know about, the travels of Macarius III, Patriarch of Antioch, and his son, Archdeacon Paul of Aleppo, starting 1652. In the 1650s, a delegation of Arabic-speaking Orthodox Christians took a long trip. Macarius III, Patriarch of Antioch and all the East, was seeking support from Orthodox rulers and fellow hierarchs to help the Orthodox Christians in Ottoman-ruled Syria. From 1652 to 1659, Macarius and his group visited Constantinople, Moldavia, Wallachia, Kiev, and Muscovy. We know a lot about their trip thanks to the detailed travel journal of the Patriarch's son, Archdeacon Paul of Aleppo. When they got to Muscovy, Paul complained over and over again about standing in freezing Russian churches for hours, days, nights, service after service. In one immortal line, he cried out to his journal privately, "Their legs must be made of stone." But he and the other Syrians couldn't just leave. They were stuck. They had to be on their best behavior to make sure they got money. When Paul finally left Muscovy and saw the spires of the Kiev caves Lavra rising in the distance, he all but danced for joy. But here's the thing. If we compare Paul's account to those of Western visitors to Muscovy at the same time, we see that the Syrians thought that they were operating in the same mental and spiritual universe as the Muscovites and the Moldavians and the Wallachians and the inhabitants of Constantinople. Where Western observers saw tyranny, Paul of Aleppo saw an Orthodox Christian empire. Where Westerners saw servility, Paul saw humility. Where Westerners thought Muscovites were ignorant for not knowing Greek and Latin, Patriarch Macarius had to struggle with Greek himself, especially when it came to prayer life and icons and saints. Whatever distinctive practices the Syrians noted in all the Orthodox lands they visited, they had shared standards to measure them by. As in, I wouldn't want to stand in church for as long as you do, but I get it. And I respect it. So if we're looking for a sense of unity and diversity, the account of 17th century Orthodox Christians living in the Middle East and traveling to other Orthodox countries and assessing what they see like insiders is a good place to start. But maybe it helped that it was also, well, the 17th century. Distances were much greater than they are now. Everything took longer. Macarius and his group traveled for over 7 years. Maybe then, Greek or Syrian or Russian or whatever bishops may not have agreed, but because they never saw each other and had no idea what the others were up to, it didn't matter. But in our day, thanks to websites and social media, everybody knows immediately who said what in a homily last Sunday, not always for the better. But there are other lessons to draw from that visit as well. Let us not underestimate the pragmatic factor when it comes to getting along. The Syrians were not there for fun. They were under the Ottomans and deep in debt. They had to be there. To get what he so desperately needed, Patriarch Macarius was willing to bless whomever necessary. Hetman Bogdan Khmelnytsky, when he inspired the Cossacks to rise up against the Poles, putting Ukraine on the mental map of Europe, sure. When that rebellion failed and it came time for the peace treaty of Andrusovo in 1667, preaching that all Slavs on all sides should be friends, absolutely. Now, I don't mention this treaty randomly, because for Orthodox Church circumstances today, it was key. Before this treaty, Kiev, right in the middle of the yellow diagonal line in front of you, had been in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, where it was a Slavic Orthodox counterweight to the newly created Moscow Patriarchate. After this treaty, it was to be a part of Muscovy. Soon after, that change was reflected in liturgy. According to an act signed by the Ecumenical Patriarch Dionysius IV in his synod, the metropolitans of Kiev were henceforth to receive their consecration in Moscow instead of Constantinople. But during liturgy, the Metropolitan of Kiev still had to commemorate the Ecumenical Patriarch as the first. As the years went by, the Metropolitan stopped that commemoration, and everyone acted as if a jurisdictional transfer had happened. But in 2018, more than 300 years later, Constantinople canceled this act, claiming jurisdiction over Ukraine, issuing a Tomos of autocephaly to the newly created Orthodox Church of Ukraine. This blew open issues that had been simmering for over a century, the ones I mentioned at the beginning. Who can grant autocephaly? If there is disagreement within the church on this, how can consensus be reached? Through a council, you say. I say, aha! But there had been no ecumenical council since the 8th century. and not everyone accepted local councils. Based on what we have seen in the last couple of centuries, how's that actually working out for us? In the 19th century, the Bulgarian Orthodox subjects of the Turkish Sultan wanted more independence from the Greek-speaking Patriarchate of Constantinople. Eventually, with the Sultan's help, they established their own ecclesial structure, the so-called Bulgarian Exarchate, in Constantinople. The Patriarch naturally said, "What about me?" And he excommunicated the main actors, but tensions continued. Ultimately, in 1872, a council of Greek bishops from the Ottoman Empire declared that ethnophilitism, or the principle of privileging nationality over territoriality, was heresy. Did that take care of the issue? No, the schism wasn't healed until 1945. 7 decades and 2 world wars later. What are the lessons for us? Lesson number 1, maybe if you're pastoral enough, early enough, say letting Bulgarians have Bulgarian-speaking bishops when they first ask for it, or if you're Moscow in 1990, letting Ukrainians have full autocephaly when they first ask for it, schism might be avoided. As Alexander II, Emperor of Russia, said of freeing the serfs in 1861, "It is better to liberate the peasants from above rather than waiting for them to seize freedom for themselves from below." Lesson or warning number 2, secular powers, both Orthodox and non-Orthodox, in the case of the Bulgarians, like the German consul and the Russian ambassador, often get involved in what appear to be inner church matters for their own geopolitical reasons, not always for the best. And finally, if you're willing to wait long enough, schisms sometimes resolve. But still, putting national impulses first is a heresy? That's pretty funny, because from the time that Constantinople declared that, here in America and in other countries that are traditionally non-Orthodox, it's been nothing but ethnophilitism. Every nationality has its own Orthodox bishop. Here in New York City, your Orthodox neighbor next door might have a different bishop because he belongs to a different ethnicity. This is the reality of Orthodox churches in the diaspora. Can we honestly say today that we are sticking to the territorial principle of one bishop in one city? Could we say it a century ago? In the early 20th century, let's say, the Russian church had an established diocese in America with a resident archbishop and priests appointed to parishes in an orderly manner. The Antiochians and the Serbs had their own ethnic vicariates under the Russian archbishop. The Ecumenical Patriarchate never objected to this, but it also did not think of the entire United States as Russia's canonical territory. Diaspora, like this city and this country, was a free-for-all. In 1907, the Ecumenical Patriarchate and the Church of Greece decided that something needed to be done about the Greek communities in the US. Who had authority over these people and their churches? I emphasize this to say that at the start of the 20th century, it was not obvious to anyone. And then something momentous happened. For what was apparently the first time since 451, 3 metropolitans appointed to examine the Greek diaspora by the Ecumenical Patriarch dusted off Canon 28 of the Council of Chalcedon and proposed to apply it to the United States, but without referring to the canon explicitly. I see many of you saying, my canon law, little rusty, what's Canon 28? I will refer to it later. All that I want to say here is, when 3 Greek metropolitans first invoked it, they used it to refer to the Greeks in the United States only, and the saying that they should be under Constantinople, and the Ecumenical Patriarch disagreed with them. Patriarch Joachim said, in Europe, with the Greeks, let things stay as they are. In the United States, let them report directly to Athens. So in the United States, in the diaspora, when the Orthodox world is more or less at peace, the national principle is the most important one. No one was clear about canonical territory, but when full-scale war broke out in Europe, the territorial principle really took a beating. In 1912, Greece, Serbia, Montenegro, and Bulgaria declared war on the Ottoman Empire and defeated it. Yay, sorry, little editorial commentary. Bigger territory. Then Bulgaria got mad because it didn't get a big enough cut of the take. They especially wanted Macedonia. So Bulgaria fought against the other original Orthodox combatants. Then Romania thought, easy win, we're in two on the other side. So I hate to break this to you, but yes, historically Orthodox nations could and would attack one another just to get more territory. Shocker. But things really blew open when the Great War and the ensuing Russian revolutions broke up Europe's old empires. This had implications for the territorial principle in Orthodoxy as well as for secular states. Former Ottoman Empire, a war between the Greeks and the Turks. Greeks lose, sad. A split in Greek parishes between royalists and Venizelists. A vacant patriarchal throne in Constantinople, and most sadly, the population exchange of Greeks and Turks in 1921. The failure of the Greek megali idea, the idea of somehow reuniting all the lands of the former Byzantine Empire, or at the very least where Greeks happened to live at that moment, this left the Patriarch of Constantinople with a greatly diminished flock in the new Turkish Republic. Maybe that is why only then did Constantinople become more inclined to emphasize their wider authority within World Orthodoxy and use Chalcedon Canon 28, again, coming on that in the United States. Former Russian and Habsburg empires. Millions of Orthodox Christians who in 1914 had been part of the Russian Empire now found themselves in different places. Some were within the new Soviet Union. Some were in the new Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and Finland. Some within the new Polish Republic. What did this mean for the Orthodox Church and the territorial principle? In Poland, the new government pressured the Orthodox hierarchy to ask the Patriarchate of Constantinople for autocephaly, which was quickly granted. A similar process led to autocephaly or autonomy for the Orthodox churches in Finland and Estonia, similarly granted by Constantinople. In Soviet Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, communist persecution all but wiped out the Orthodox Church. I have the image of the new martyr on the screen in front of you to remind us that the new martyrs of Orthodoxy in the former Soviet Union were not all clerical and not all male, something that we often forget. So the star of Constantinople is rising just as Moscow's is falling. It looked as if this was the end of the Russian Church's former huge influence on the Orthodox world. But after World War II, when the Soviet government allowed the Moscow Patriarchate to reorganize, the Russian Orthodox Church was quick to respond to what it saw as Constantinople's unwarranted claims and actions. It reasserted its own jurisdiction over Estonia. It declared Czechoslovakia autocephalous, and this one is hilarious actually, it made Poland return the autocephaly it had gotten from Constantinople and re-petition for autocephaly from Moscow. Granted. So here's our structural issue number one. Clearly, both patriarchates are claiming the right to grant autocephaly, and there is no consensus on what grounds. Maybe the way to solve the problem would be a council, or would it? The year that I was born, that's me with my dad on the right, 1961, Patriarch Athenagoras of Constantinople built on a long-standing idea to initiate a series of pan-Orthodox conferences to prepare the way for a great and holy council of the Orthodox Church. The process grew as slowly or as quickly as I did. 1971. Nadia Kizenko is 10 years old, and an inter-Orthodox preparatory commission met for the first time and published draft documents. But then Patriarch Athenagoras died, and the council project kind of sank. The original topics didn't really correspond to the needs of the church anymore. Some people said maybe things like autocephaly and the status of churches in the diaspora were more important. The elephant in the room was the Orthodox Church in America, OCA, which had petitioned the Russian Orthodox Church for autocephaly in 1970 on the grounds that Russia was its mother church. Moscow granted it. Constantinople refused to recognize it. Oh, and ignored by everybody was the little Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, the church in which I was raised, which claimed that it was the free part of the Russian Orthodox Church, and the Moscow Patriarchate was a tool of the Soviet state. Not false. But since this was Orthodoxy in America, where just about everyone can call themselves an Orthodox church, we could all go on in our own little worlds. 1976, the bicentennial of the United States. I'm 15 years old. And finally, the first Pan-Orthodox Pre-Conciliar Conference. A revised agenda includes autocephaly and the diaspora. But the commission did what many of us do, and they set aside those sensitive topics until the very last. They hoped that working together on simpler issues would make agreement on more difficult issues easier to achieve later. Suddenly, good news, 1988, the millennium of Christianity in Rus, the collapse of communism, freedom for churches, which had struck an uneasy balance between persecution and cooperation. But what does that mean for Orthodox dialogue? As the churches in formerly communist countries gained new freedom and new opportunities for growth, they naturally focused on themselves in rebuilding their position in their own countries rather than think about inter-Orthodox cooperation on a global level. Lots going on, including a petition for canonical independence from Ukraine. Still, preparatory work for a council continued in a desultory kind of way. By now, I'm almost 30. Shout out to my brother Pete, who came to the conference today. So 1993, the preparatory commission deals with diaspora and autocephaly. There were 3 different points of view. Finally, Canon 28, for all of you who've been waiting for this moment. The first point of view is Alexandria, Constantinople in Greece. You can read through the details of the canon while I speak. All that I want to say here is now, here is a clear, well-regulated militia Second Amendment moment, if there ever was one. Depending on how you define the territories of Pontus, Asia, and Thrace, and depending on how you define among the barbarians, only Constantinople, because it's an imperial city, perhaps relevant, no, has the right to exercise jurisdiction outside its territorial boundaries. So if one regards the United States as being among the barbarians, and I often do, to be honest, the Ecumenical Patriarchate is in charge in the United States. This shows the problem of modern interpretations of antique texts, and this is not the only point of view. Opinion number 2 was the opinion of the Romanian Orthodox Church. Each autocephalous church, they said, each autocephalous mother church has the right to govern its own national diaspora. But churches formed as the result of missionary activity constitute a special case, since they belong to a different nationality than the members of the missionizing church. Russia and Antioch, opinion number 3. also no to the Greek interpretation. You can't pretend history never happened. Every situation has to be considered on its own terms. Whatever their origins, churches of the diaspora, quote, must gradually receive the opportunity to grow into new local churches and to receive autocephaly from their own mother churches. So 3 clearly different points of view. What was the preparatory commission supposed to do? They said, okay, this is above our pay grade. We can't solve this. They dropped autocephaly from the agenda. The best they could do was to come up with a text on autonomy and the means by which it is proclaimed. Fast forward to 2016. I'm 55 years old, and the council is finally going to happen. Make extra sure everything goes smoothly. Drop autocephaly from the agenda of the Great and Holy Council. Stick to safe topics that everyone has agreed upon, or have they? First, the Bulgarian Orthodox Church pulled out, disputing some of the texts that had already been approved and saying there was not enough time for preparation. Not enough time. I've gone from age 0 to 55. How much time do you need? Really? Then the Georgian Orthodox Church pulled out because of its own disagreements about several of the documents. Then the Antiochian Church pulls out because, for like fancy reasons, but really because of its dispute over the ecclesiastical jurisdiction of Qatar, because Qatar is also claimed by Jerusalem. So conciliar territory raising its head again. And then the Russian Orthodox Church pulled out saying, well, without the Antiochians, without the Bulgarians, without the Georgians, how pan-Orthodox can this council be? So when the council in Crete finally took place, it was sadly more of a testimony to the disunity of Orthodox churches, of the Orthodox Church, than its unity. This was the first obvious fissure and fault line in World Orthodoxy. But the Great and Holy Council might still have worked if there had been a real conciliar follow-up process, which was proposed by the Romanian Patriarch Daniel, among others. He basically said, okay, synodality should become a rule for universal orthodoxy by regular synodal meetings every 5, 7, 10, whatever years. From this point of view, let's not treat the Holy and Great Council like this eschatological event, which is going to change everything. Let's treat it like an important event, and other Orthodox synods, other pan-Orthodox synods must successively follow the pan-Orthodox synod. Okay. But what happened in Ukraine made that impossible. What actually happened? Until 2018, everybody in the Orthodox Church agreed. There is one canonical Orthodox Church in Ukraine, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, headed by Metropolitan Onufry. The others are all uncanonical. Until 2018, the Ecumenical Patriarch was willing to abide by this. But perhaps because Russia didn't show up to Crete, the Ecumenical Patriarchate rediscovered 1686 and said, okay, we're taking it back. The de facto transfer of Kiev to Moscow never happened. We will try to bring all of the churches in Ukraine, canonical and previously non-canonical, together and issue autocephaly to the newly established Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Patriarch of Moscow says, wow, if you're going to encroach on our canonical territory, which you haven't challenged for over 300 years, that's it. We're breaking communion. That's where we were in 2021 when a good book on the subject came out, title on the screen in front of you. Several of the authors are present in this room. Hi, Pavlo. So even before Russia attacked Ukraine in February 22, the conflict around the emergence of an autocephalous church in Ukraine had already split World Orthodoxy into 2 main camps. One camp was represented by the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which edited the Tomos of autocephaly, and 3 other autocephalous churches which recognized that act. The other camp is that of the Patriarchate of Moscow, which opposed the new ecclesial structure in Ukraine and regards it as schismatic. Some churches have made statements supporting Moscow's position, but none of them have interrupted communion. Some are staying neutral. But although Ukraine is the focus and the cause of this conflict, the argument has exposed deeper divisions within World Orthodoxy. Autocephaly, the territorial principle, and the synodal process as inadequate to the task at hand. In the time remaining to us, let us face these fault lines and address them. But I want to emphasize that there is not one simple fault line between two camps. It's not quite as simple as Moscow versus Constantinople. It's not a question of where this or that autocephalous church stands. It is a question of positions within each church, within all of Orthodoxy. If I were Bones on Star Trek, I would say, I'm a historian, Jim, not a theologian. I can't judge who's right and who's wrong, but I can note that there are at least two mutually exclusive competing opinions in Orthodoxy. Neither is going away. That is the deadlock for which Orthodoxy needs a way out, and we need to find it in an Orthodox way. Orthodoxy means being in communion, or does it? A majority of local churches, Romanians, Serbs, Bulgarians, are in communion with both Moscow and Alexandria, which have excommunicated one another. Canonically, this is not okay, but maybe practically it's helpful because it allows things to hang together. Is the solution just to stumble along? Frankly, stumbling along and ignoring problems has its advantages. Let's face it, for many people, Orthodoxy is simply identity. Some people want the church to be mostly a place of community where you can talk to fellow Bulgarians or fellow Serbs or whatever. To its credit, the Orthodox Church in North America saw the problem and tried to do something about it. The organization now known as the Assembly of Canonical Orthodox Bishops of North and Central America basically said, okay, bishops won't compete for turf. We'll form a standing committee and cooperate. That was a healthy look at reality, but maybe we should take it a step further and stop acting as if the territorial principle is still absolute. So here's my proposal. Maybe it's time to rethink the territorial principle altogether. Challenge number 2 for inter-Orthodox relations, synodality, aka conciliarity. The traditional form of decision-making in the Orthodox Church was a council or synod. We have all probably sung or heard the stihiron on the praises of the Holy Fathers of the Ecumenical Councils to the special melody of having set all aside. Nice, but if we look at the 7 ecumenical councils, we see that they were not places of decision-making in our modern sense with discussion and exchange of arguments, but rather places of confirming the emperor or empresses, in the case of Irene and Icon's opinion. Crete was not exactly a ringing testament to process and unity. So what do our councils look like now? And what might they look like? Let's take an example I know best. In 2006, when the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia was meeting in council to discuss going under the omophorion of the Moscow Patriarchate, each parish was asked to send 1 or 2 lay delegates to represent it. It seemed obvious to most parishes that they should send their most active, most dedicated, and most hands-on members. To some parishes, that meant women. These were ROCOR parishes, not traditionally known for their crazy liberalism. This was not a feminist statement. No, this was something that one of the most conservative jurisdictions in the United States thought was no problem. It was rather, okay, parish rep, got it. Why not send the person or people who actually work in and for the parish? Well, the synod organizers then said, well, actually, they have to be males. And when the genuinely confused parishes said, why? The excuse was, it wasn't like that at the All-Russian Council in 1917. Okay? Now, true, there were no women at that council, but the council's 566 delegates did include 91 bishops, 20 monks, 170 parish clergy of various ranks, and 288 laymen. Having laymen be more than half of the total number of delegates was an innovation in 1917 compared to other periods. But in 1917, it seemed normal, even urgent. And to many ROCOR parishes in 2006, it seemed normal to have women represent them. And in 2016, it seemed normal to a lot of, pious Orthodox women that they could contribute to the Holy and Great Council. The result was, okay, you can come as special observers. 4 out of 243 who got part of one sentence in the final document. But okay, 4 is greater than 0. I don't normally hold up the Russian Orthodox Church as a progressive example, but the last 2 local Russian church councils included a 10% participation rate by women designated as representatives, both nun and lay women. 38 women out of 317 delegates in 1990, 72 out of 711 in 2009. If you look in the back rows behind the men in purple, you see some white head coverings, of course, this is Russia. You see a few bareheaded women, radical, even Russia, progressive. So maybe having parishes decide who their representative to a church council should be normal. Maybe including women at a council reflecting the reality of parish and church life should be as normal as having me talk to you now, which raises another question. Why privilege the synod as a form? I recently attended a conference of the Orthodox Christian Association of Medicine, Psychology, and Religion, OCAMPR. Participants included medical doctors, psychotherapists, monks, priests, bishops, a normal functioning conference where things got done. Might meetings like that be a model for how we can move forward? What is the most useful way for the church to meet? Even the Patriarch of Jerusalem invited Bartholomew and the others to a meeting in 2020. He called it a fraternal meeting in love, because if he called it a synoxis or a synod, that would have sent off the canon and the primacy alarm bells ringing. So, irreverent proposal. Maybe we should just call a time out on synods for 5 or 10 years. Maybe we should focus on councils, or whatever we call them, that include wider participation of laity, like 1917, like 2016. And maybe we can also accept that women are also laity, also love the church, and can also represent their parishes or professional fields. So for example, if the church is going to discuss bioethics, why not invite a specialist in bioethics? To quote Father John Erickson, maybe at this point, conciliarity at the lower levels of church life, including a wider range of participants, might be a better way of sharing real stories rather than self-serving myths, real memories versus official positions. Oh, and this is just a personal wish. I wish the Romanians and the Finns would play a larger role than they have so far. So that's inner Orthodox relations. What about how Orthodoxy deals with the rest of the world, including political structures? Right now, we have 2 different paradigms, with other Orthodox churches falling somewhere in between. Not surprisingly, as Fordham's own Nate Wood has noted, how a church relates to the broader society in which it's located depends on concrete political circumstances. How much access does a church have to state power? One extreme is the Patriarchate of Moscow. Moscow, applying Orthodoxy's tradition of close ties between church and state, Symphonia, has gone all in. Profoundly pessimistic about this world, it opposes any kind of liberalism, including theories of human rights. This was evident already in a document that the Russian Orthodox Church prepared in 2000, many ways the first of its kind, the basis of the social concept of the Russian Orthodox Church, which it developed in 2008 with the teaching of the Russian Orthodox Church on human dignity, freedom, and rights. The bottom line in those texts is secular rights and freedoms are dangerous because they can legalize sin. The state should restrict secular rights and freedoms to help humanity rightly fulfill its God-given dignity. Also, already in 2000, the Russian Orthodox Church was already calling Christians, Orthodox Christians, to serve the fatherland and the state in support of the army. Now, I know that just war is not something new for the Catholic Church. For the Orthodox Church, this is the first time that this actually appeared. Legitimizing just war, given the atrocities committed by the Russian army in Ukraine, it is now both ironic and tragic to read the Russian Orthodox Church then talking about how one of the ways we can distinguish a just war from an unjust war is how soldiers treat prisoners in the civilian population, especially children, women, and the elderly. And, as they said in 2000, although not in 2022, if the government misbehaves, the church has the moral right to oppose it. Now, let's be fair. Maybe we can say that these features reflect the crisis and fragmentation that Russia was in after communism. But after Russia's full-scale attack on Ukraine and the ongoing war, there's no such excuse. From the time the war began, the sermons of Patriarch Kirill have gone beyond. On Forgiveness Sunday 22, he described the war as having metaphysical significance. In September of 2022, the Patriarch of Moscow said, if someone dies in the performance of his military duty, he commits an act tantamount to sacrifice, and so we believe that this sacrifice washes away all the sins a person has committed. Whoa! Nowhere in Orthodoxy do we find the claim that death in war washes away someone's sins. Christ offered himself as a sacrifice. He did not kill others. Sins are washed away only by repentance, not by death for a righteous cause. Fortunately, at least one Orthodox bishop, Arseni Heikkinen of Kuopio in Karelia in Finland, called this heresy, which it is. But I wish the Orthodox Church had a better mechanism for reproving a hierarch who crosses the line. At the other extreme of how to relate to the world is Constantinople. Constantinople has no state, so it has had to focus its public influence on the international level. In its social ethics document, For the Life of the World, it has put forward a more radical model for Orthodox Christian politics in a pluralistic world. It was composed in a process that we may truly call synodal, involving both lay people and clergy, male and female, some of whom are here in this room. For the Life of the World is based on compassionate acceptance of the global pluralism of our time, where the Russian texts are pessimistic, the Ecumenical Patriarchate is optimistic. The flow claims to speak for Orthodoxy in general, and full disclosure, I must say I find the Ecumenical Patriarchate's vision a more attractive Orthodox theology that responds with an openness to the challenges of secularism, liberalism, and human rights theory. But then, I live in the United States. I like what Telly Papanikolaou says: the Christian must enter the world to achieve theosis in such a way as to ascetically struggle to learn how to love in the face of another who does not share her Orthodox presuppositions. By the way, Telly actually wrote her. So thanks for that, Telly. Also, accepting pluralism as an ascetic endeavor comes at a cost. Yes, the pluralistic world we have been given is the arena for each Orthodox Christian's ascetical struggle towards theosis. Yes, this means relinquishing religious nationalism, delinking religious and national identity, reducing institutional power, but at least the churches would finally resist the temptation of Judas. Yes, these are strong words. But one could also quote the words of the Psalm, "Behold, I and the children which the Lord has given me." Here we are with each other and the church or churches the Lord has given us in the world in which we live. As this lecture ends, And as we prepare to go out into the world of New York City and far beyond, let us be heartened by the words of Father John Erickson. The current storm that started with the autocephaly of the OCU, like that over the autocephaly of the OCA half a century earlier, has revealed the limitations of the ecclesiology that the church has depended on for many centuries. We are challenged to be church in a new and radically different context, recognizing our own temporality while trusting in the Lord's promise to be with us always, even unto the close of the age. Let us be that church. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Don't go anywhere.
Yeah, thank you, George.
No, don't go anywhere.
okay,
You're going
okay.
to take questions.
I know.
You good?
Yep, fine.
Okay. All right, so don't go anywhere. Questions for Dr. Kizenko? I mean, I have a whole bunch, but I'll see her later. So what are your questions? John.
So I'm posing this question not theologically, but practically. Though obviously there is a theological component to the question, but do you think that it's possible to have synodality, conciliarity, whatever we want to call it, without primacy, without some sense of primacy? And I mean, I guess part of the motivation behind the question is, I mean, sometimes majorities are wrong. We know this from the history of the ecumenical councils, but also local synods and their reception. And so, I mean, is there a role for primacy? And if so, what do you think that would mean?
I'm honestly starting to wonder about that, but we managed to get along, and when I say we, I mean the Orthodox churches have managed to get along for a long time, sort of, without it. But now, in fact, it's that we're seeing the problems of not having primacy, and I suspect that everyone who's Roman Catholic in this room is leaning back saying, well, at least we don't have to worry about that. At least, and I envy you, I really do, at such a moment. But I also want to say that about, this isn't about synodality, but I want to make clear that the territorial principle problem isn't something that's specifically Orthodox. If you look at the church, let's say look at the Catholic churches in Lviv, in Ukraine, there is a Roman Catholic bishop of Lviv, there is a Greek Catholic bishop of Lviv, and there is an Armenian Catholic bishop of Lviv. 3 Catholic bishops on one territory. So even primacy doesn't solve that. So I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping that the theologians in this room will actually start thinking about that.
So thank you so much for talking to us today. I found this really captivating and very interesting. So thank you for that. And my question is, I found the concept of autocephaly very interesting. And I was curious, I wrote my question down so I remember it, if there are any contemporary examples of debates or challenges that surround this autocephaly within the Orthodox Church, of course, with the greater theme of the Orthodox Church. And what do you believe are the best ways that we can address these today, with the issues going on today, moving forward as well?
Well, I would say that the biggest contemporary example of the crisis of the autocephaly issue is precisely what has happened in Ukraine. I mean, that essentially the Ecumenical Patriarchate said, we have the right to declare autocephaly, that we let Ukraine go somehow in 1686, so we can call it back and declare autocephaly now. Moscow said, no, you can't because it's our canonical territory, you can't go there. So that is actually a purely theological issue of who who gets to decide? And there is no mechanism for deciding. My hope, using the forum of something as important as the Economos lecture, was to get people to finally start talking about it and looking at it in a meaningful way. Because it really, I mean, what I tried to show was that it is not obvious. Earlier, the Greek speakers, the Romanians, the Russians, and the Antiochians all had different points of view. They have not come closer to an agreement. So my hope is that this is the beginning of a frank discussion within Orthodoxy to try to sort this out. And this is an advantage of having primacy, by the way, where ultimately there's a court of last resort where one person can say, this is how it's going to be. We don't have that. And we're seeing the problems with it now.
Thank you for the very informative lecture.
Thank you, my brother.
So, now that the new Ukrainian church, how, for instance, is all the property now going to split up? The Moscow Patriarch, for instance, control the Ukraine. They built the cathedrals. They own the property. Does the Ukraine, how do they
Well, one could say, first of all, who actually built the churches and the cathedrals, on whose watch were they built when? Who is the legitimate successor church now? Like, that's actually the bigger issue, because as we all know, just because somebody built something at some point doesn't mean, or that some institutional body built something at some point, doesn't mean that it can't then pass over into someone else's territory. And I suspect that some of the places you may be talking about, like the Kiev Caves, Lavra, they certainly weren't built by the Moscow Patriarchate. And the more to the point, however, is that they don't belong to any church now. It's the property of the state, it's a museum, and the question is who the state lets use it and who not. But the state does have the legal right to say, we let one church use it for all this time, but it's a museum, and we will and now we can give the keys to whomever we want, but it's a museum and it's our museum. But that's actually a fair point to make, and that is indeed the reason for some of the rankled feelings by some of the people in the old church. Yes?
One more?
I come from a totally different worldview. So I was reading what you said to realize my world. I'm an Anglican.
Oh, okay, I was going to say, what's that?
And our claim really is about all churches are autocephaly, right? So the basic Reformation claim of Anglicanism was the Roman bishop had no business messing with the English church. And so we've really been able to hold ourselves together as a group of now 40 autocephalic churches until very recently. And the thing that's destroying us is not territoriality. We still would hope for that. But there are churches who believe, especially that we Americans are so heterodox and heteropractic, that bishops from other churches now, as a matter of, as an emergency move, have to invade our country to save the poor Anglicans in America from us heretics. So when I listened to you talk, I didn't have any sense that there were any dogmatic issues. I didn't hear any matters of discipline or doctrine that are involved. It merely sounds more like territoriality and governance. And I just wonder if there are, as all of this happens, you see, for us it was the theology led to the breach. But it sounds, I just wonder if there's now anything's happening the other direction. That if autocephaly falls apart, that there also are doctrinal issues that are.
Yes and no. I suspect that one of the things you're referring to is the issue of to what degree a church is considered being liberal. What is its position on same-sex marriage, for example? No? Okay, all right. Well, funny you should mention that, because in his, I mentioned, okay. In his Forgiveness Sunday survey, Patriarch Kirill said something that seemed outrageous to people at the time, which is that this war is happening because there's a morality test, and that the price tag of entering the new European Union is, do you allow gay pride parades? And essentially, the reason that the people of Donbass have been paying the price all these years is because they refuse to allow gay pride parades. And that's why all of this is happening now. Now, by the way, a point of fact, the people of Donbass were never asked about gay pride parades. And would you rather have war or a gay pride parade? That was also never put to them that way. But the really interesting thing is, though, if Russia had not attacked Ukraine, there would have been total consensus on the part of the Orthodox and the Greek Catholics in Ukraine that same-sex, marriages, no, gay pride parades, whoa. So the funny thing is that Russia's attacking Ukraine has done more to make Ukrainians not necessarily be fans of things like same-sex marriage, but at least say, okay, like whatever side they're on, we're not on it. And also the All-Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations. The funny thing is the people who are pushing the anti-gay pride, same-sex marriage thing are not the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, are not the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, certainly not the Greek Catholic Church. They are Ukrainian Protestants funded by American Protestants. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not sure if this is really an answer to your question, but it certainly, it shows that, in fact, that the two Orthodox and Greek Catholic churches in, let's say, January 2022, nobody was talking about or thinking about same-sex marriage. That wasn't on the table. It was, ironically, thanks to Patriarch Kirill, who put it on the table, and then American Protestants who jumped up and sent it a golden opportunity, that it is now on the table in a way that it never was.
All right, please join me in thanking Dr. So, I know her.
I've always wanted a blue, something that came in a blue Tiffany bag. Oh, I'm not even going to look inside. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Unfortunately, we did have Bishop Irene who was going to give our benediction, but for pastoral reasons, he had to cancel last minute. So I'm going to say a very simple prayer as part of our Orthodox tradition, and maybe actually it gives us a bit of hope to all the problems and complexities that you were kind of laying out for us. So I'm going to read that very simply, and then everybody is invited to the reception outside, right here out the door. Okay? So if I'll ask you to stand, please. O Heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of Truth, who are in all places and fill all things, treasury of blessings and the giver of life, come and dwell in us, cleanse us from every stain, and save our souls, O gracious Lord. Thank you all very much, and please enjoy the reception.